walk us through your framework, because I think the listeners deserve to hear the framework so they can apply it. And really, we can dive deeper into that.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to walk through it. Before I do, I want to zoom out and share why we developed a framework because it actually wasn't part of the class when I took it. And it was something that we developed together in the process of writing the book and researching. And we wanted to develop a framework because as you are facing one of these big life decisions, from if this is this the person for me, to where do I want to live and how should I decide when to move, to, if a relationship isn't working and you need to unwind it or get divorced, we are in heightened emotional states. That is just, the way that as humans we are wired when we're facing a big life decision. It's stressful. All of the outcomes seem not ideal sometimes, right? If it was an easy decision, it would be, we would have made it already. And so when you are in that heightened emotional state, you're more likely to make decisions through what Daniel Kahneman describes as system one thinking, which is, the automatic, the kind of easier to access, the fight or flight. And when you're in that state, it's very hard to access what he calls system two, which is the logical, the more rational, the deliberate, the intentional system of thinking. And so a framework really helps you slow down to say, hey, take a beat. Most of life's big decisions do not need to be made in an instant. And if you apply this way of thinking, it's not a silver bullet, but it will help you make sure that you're turning over the right rocks so that you are making this from a place of intention and deliberate decision making, as opposed to a knee-jerk reaction that you're going to regret. So that's the rationale for why we have a framework. And then in terms of what the framework is, it's 5 C's. So each C is, well, I'll lay it out in a linear way, but it's not a linear process. You might go through it and then kind of do them out of, we suggest try this order first, but you'll go back and use the different C's in different points of the decision. So the first C is to clarify what is most important to you. It sounds like you had a very clear picture early on. Other people have a really hard time with that because our wants are very powerfully influenced by other people's wants. And so if you see if you're happy renting and you see all of your peers and friends buying their own homes, you might start to think, oh, am I behind? Should I want to be buying my own home? So you need to really get clear with your values, what you want, not just what your parents think you should want or what your friends are doing. So once you've done that, then the second C is to communicate with the person or people most involved in the decision. We are not islands, right? Everyone is making decisions in an ecosystem. And so it's very important before you've made up your mind to bring in the other people or person who are going to be affected by that decision. And so much of communication is not just talking, it's listening. So at the communicate step, it's to share what's on your mind at an appropriate time. So you're not springing it on them as you're brushing your teeth, getting ready for bed at night, or pushing the kids out the door to go to school in the morning. So set an appointment, listen, tread lightly. These are really charged topics. You might have to come back to them when you're both in a better head state. And so know that the communication is not a one and done. It's an ongoing process. The third C is to generate a broad range of choices. When we're in the throes of a big decision, we tend to think in very binary terms. We think, do I marry this person or break up with them? Do I go for the promotion or do I quit my job? But there are so many options in between, and that often getting more creative can help you generate those additional options that are going to help you get more of what you want that you've already clarified in the first step. The fourth C is check in with friends, family, and trusted resources. And sometimes checking in with people helps you generate those creative options. You ask someone, hey, help me understand how you thought about who you want to spend your life with, or how you thought about whether you should move or renovate your house or whatever the decision is that you're facing. And that can help you start to access their wisdom, some of the experience they might have gained by going through the similar decision, and generate those additional options that you can't see. And then the fifth C is to examine the likely consequences on a variety of different time horizons, right? We as humans have a very powerful short-term bias. So we see the short-term implications, both positive and negative, more clearly. But if you can trick your brain by playing out the decision over the medium term and the long term, then you can start to get over that short-term bias and start to see, okay, this is how this would play out in the long term. Yes, it's really painful to move in the short term. You're dealing with all the logistics and you're meeting your neighbors. In the long term, though, it might be a place with great schools, and that could really benefit your family in the further out years. So making sure you're turning over all those rocks. And I would say the first C, the clarify step, is the most important, because if you get that right, it's hard, it's tricky. But if you get that right, the other C's flow more freely from there.
In a relationship, do you find with your spouse that you come from things from a different way, or does your spouse tend to be more of a visionary and you tend to be more in the weeds, or do you have any type of the differences just specifically in your own life? Do you feel like these are challenges that this really helps you overcome in a day-to-day operations of the relationship?
Yes, I am definitely a forest person. So I see the big picture. My husband is an engineer, a computer scientist, so he sees the trees. And so a lot, yes, I think it is helpful for us to have this framework, the shared vocabulary, this shorthand that we can use with each other as we're talking about big life decisions. And it's also something we spent, we wrote the book, we got our contract with our publisher in the fall of 2020. So if we bring back, ourselves to that time, we had, 2 kids zooming into Zoom kindergarten and second grade. My husband and I were performing our full-time corporate jobs and rooms in our house that were never intended to be home offices. And so one of the things we realized we were doing wrong as we were trying to make decisions, all the decisions we were faced in that time, is not communicating effectively, because we have these different approaches and because we were just around each other all the time. And so we started taking our research and saying, let's make an appointment and have this conversation on a hike on the weekend, right? So that was one of the few things we could all do easily back then. We would let our kids run up ahead of us. And there was something about getting out of our day-to-day chaos with the laundry piled up and the dishes in the sink that helped us access more expansive thinking. And so that has been a practice that we have kept, and we have some of our best discussions on hikes because it helps us get rid of those tendencies that you mentioned. And I'm not defaulting to we have to think 10 years in advance, and he's not defaulting to, but tomorrow, what are we going to do? And we can use the framework in a way that is has more shared vision and more expansive thinking.
Yeah, I relate to that really well, because in our relationship, I am the visionary. I think way far into the future. Again, my wife gets right into the data, the details, the how. Like, she starts with how, I start with where are we heading. And what's really interesting is we've always known that, but more recently there's been this aha moment for both of us that we're communicating in a better way because we appreciate. It's almost like early on in a relationship, it's a challenge, but as you work through it, you start to really appreciate how somebody else sees it differently than you. To me, it's like the CEO, COO role. And there are different times where, I need her to be the CEO and I go into the operations side, or I'm the CEO and I'm like, hey, we're not thinking long-term enough on this. We have to think third and fourth level decision-making here, not just singular, what if this happens? And recently she made the comment, we were sitting with some friends and she said, I've always known Scott's a visionary, but really to understand that he starts with the end, like really at the far end. And I start at the bottom. I build the Legos from the bottom. He has to look at the box and see what it's going to look like before he finishes. And it's really been helpful. It's always funny to me because no matter how long you're married, and you talk about check-in, I love this because peers can be a really great resource for helping your relationship flourish, especially when it comes to the financial decisions, understanding how people have got there, right? So just talk to me a little bit about how the check-in part, I just want to go back to that for a second and understand a little bit more, because I think a lot of times people surround themselves with maybe people that aren't doing they might be bringing in the wrong types of check-ins, or the people that are giving them, maybe their peers aren't in the same place as them. And that can be really challenging in a relationship.
Well, it really depends on the types of decision that you're facing, what that check-in should look like. So there is research that says, for example, if you're trying to figure out what job is available, right? We're in a time when people are getting laid off, and there's all the great resignation after effects, right? So there's lots of folks who are kind of thinking about that next step from a career perspective. There's research that shows that for that particular decision, weak ties, so people who are not in your closest first degree connections, if you will, on LinkedIn, if you go to your second and third degree connections, they actually have a lot of information that you might not have in your immediate network. So it's very important to check in with a broad set of people for that decision. On the other hand, a decision about when to have a child, whether or not to have a second or third child, those are deeply personal decisions. So those are not ones that you want to go to your friend's cousin's accountant with, right? And those people are not going to be raising that child. So the decision itself has a very important impact on what the check-in looks like. I would say the other thing that's helpful is to think of the check-in not as a what should I do question. You're not having the other person tell you, give you direct advice, but as a source of perspective. So I like to say, if you're making a relationship decision, who are those people who have relationships you admire? And talk to them about, how did you and your partner decide to spend your lives together? What are the things that you've done to keep your relationship flourishing over the years? Help me understand how you have thought of it, as opposed to, is this the person for me? And the check-in, I would say the third thing is that check-ins can be with published studies, because there is a lot of research. When we're in the throes of a big life decision, we think we're the only ones who have faced this. No one's ever had to deal with this before. But the truth is, there is so much rich research out there. A lot of it we cite in the book. And as you can imagine, a labor economist co-author, we have a lot of data in there. So when my husband and I, for example, were deciding whether we should move during COVID, I was writing the chapter on where to live and when to move, and I came across this study in the Journal of Environmental Psychology that looked at density, so the amount of square footage per person in a household, and its effect on family harmony for families with young kids. And if you can imagine, at that time, no matter how much space you had, you felt like it wasn't enough. And so we were thinking, do we move out of the city? Do we move to the suburbs? This paper was so interesting because it said, actually, there's a point of diminishing returns. Yes, it's helpful if 5 people aren't sharing one bathroom, but after a certain point, it actually could help make kids, especially if they're boys, feel disconnected and lonely to have too big of a space. And what matters even more than the actual density is your family's perception of the space. So if you feel like your space is fit for purpose, it's enough, that actually is more powerful than the number of square footage. And that study was so powerful to read, to say, oh, okay, maybe that's not the silver bullet solution to all of our issues right now. Let's think about what we need and how we might be able to get it, other than physically moving our entire house. And I can share more about that example if it's helpful, but that study is a form of check-in that was very helpful for me as we were facing that life decision.
No, I love that. And what's interesting is when we, in 2009, we moved to a house that was more than double our previous home, and our children were only 1 and 4 at the time, I believe, somewhere around, 1 and 4. And so we obviously had a bedroom for everybody. And I decided, and my wife together, we decided that we would put them in one room and buy bunk beds. And I remember explaining why I felt like that was really important. And I said, I feel like the size of our house is so much bigger than what I grew up with. And I want them at the end of every night to have each other. If there's nothing else, they're going to rely upon each other. And I look back on those days, and it was funny. There were times where my oldest son really appreciated that his younger brother was in the room. Then there was times where the younger brother really appreciated that the older brother was in the room. And it created this evening routine that included both of them. I actually have a recording on my phone of me having one of those evening conversations with the kids around the Elf on the Shelf. And it's priceless. It's one of the things I will never forget, but it goes right back to that research in that the closeness of our family, even in a bigger space, we just reutilized. We created a playroom. We had their bedroom that was separate. So all our spaces had almost like this, this separate feel. So everybody had a spot to go if they needed the space, but they also had a place to connect and come back together. And it was really, really powerful. And I'm very grateful that we kind of pushed that upon our kids early on. If you like clips like this, I have a similar clip here. And if you want to watch the full video, click here.